told my ride over tonight that I was glad I was only dealing with the First Amendment. And then I forgot my reading glasses. And I could have winged it, but it would have been a lot more generalized. Thanks Susie Berry for loaning me a pair of reading glasses.
I just bought this today because I lost mine, so. You're in luck.
My last good pair has one leg. Like, okay. The biggest problem that I've seen in America today with my observations of the last 40 years is that Americans today treat the state as though the state is God. That could easily offend people saying that, but I think by the time I'm done, you'll all agree. Back in the beginning of my sojourn toward liberty, my first run-ins with authorities was my first efforts exercising my right of travel, which a lot of the judges along the way and our founding fathers said was so fundamental, so well known back in the days that they didn't put it in the Bill of Rights. So the right to travel is another topic. But I got wind of a man in Florida that had wrote extensively and researched extensively about the right to travel, so I got his works. He's a very bitter man in his writings. You can tell he's extremely intelligent. This is back in the 80s, thoroughly disgusted with the state of affairs in the country. And he put it best in the preface to his book. He put it best. I'm going to read a lot tonight. That's why I was panicked when I got my glasses. In America, Christianity has been the greatest religious casualty in the rise of twin religions of democracy and the state as the people's new religions of choice. While millions continue to pay lip service to Christianity, they direct their worshipful respects always to democracy and the state. The truth of this proposition is prima facie evidenced by the acts of most alleged Christianity practitioners as opposed to their lip service. A mere introductory list of such acts would include the following. 1. They petition the state for permission to preach their Christian message by obtaining charters for their churches in the form of state-issued corporate exemptions. 2. They deal in usurious contracts by way of mortgages on church property. 3. They seek licenses from the state for permission to marry. 4. They register their children with the state at birth. 5. They send their children to state-controlled schools. 6. They subscribe to the state social insurance scheme, etc. Clearly, by their acts and deeds, the state, in the name of democracy, is their religion and their godhead, for they would sooner offend the doctrines of Christianity than the doctrines of the state anytime they are put to the pinch. I was 26 or 7 when I read that, and it stuck with me pretty hard, because I think he nailed it.
Ooh, what's his name?
I'm sure he's long deceased.
Okay, I can remember. It's fine.
James B. Wood III.
Thank you.
Next thing I'm going to read.
What was the book?
That book, it's a 3-part series, Travel as of Right. I found it online back in the day, and that was the early 90s, and I can't find it now, but I have found, there are, like I said, 3 in the series. I have found one, I found the 3rd in the series, and I don't remember where I found it. I've actually got an extra. I'm going to read the Declaration of Independence. How many here are super familiar with that? Maybe it's time for a redo. It's several pages in this little book. Citizens Rule Book, Jury Handbook. Come across these back about the time I come up with my travel books. In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, I want to stop right here. Thomas Jefferson penned this, so we were told. He quoted John Locke, 1600s, he was born early 1600s, English, extensively in his Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object of evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them, to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right estimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasion on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and to eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislature. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial, from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases the benefits of a trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in our neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rules into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislature and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever, He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. They were a pretty tolerant bunch, weren't they? He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfect scarcity, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their own country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attention to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by the legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and to consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these United Colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that they are all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as a free and independent state they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliance, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge for each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then there's a list of the signatures. Now when he goes through here in the middle, all of his grievances against the king. When I read it for the first time, I thought to myself, we're no better off today than they were. Okay, now, read the First Amendment. There's so much to the First Amendment if you look at each part of it and dissect it. And I came across the maxim of law early on. I quote, "The origin of a thing ought to be looked into." Now, I've developed a very bad habit of looking into the origin of things. And it's an exhausting and an endless study. In doing so, I'll give you a for instance. Just want to get my page right here. Okay. I mentioned John Locke. I'd heard of William Blackstone, I'd heard of John Locke, I'd heard of Eduardo Koch, and at one point in my studies I came across Locke's book, The Second Treatise of Government, and he says early into it that his first treatise is not necessary to read to get the full gist of the second, which is good. I've never seen the first one. The second one is, it's a short read, and it's an amazing, he lays out man's plight, man's creation, man's plight, the creation of positive government, and what to do when the government goes off the rails. He was actually a mentor to William Blackstone, which was actually as it says here, one of the justices of His Majesty's Court in Common Pleas. Well, I had to have Blackstone, and there's four books in Blackstone series. I've read the first two, and I came across in some of the earlier writings in America that the early attorneys were required to read Blackstone's works, at which point they were said to have read the law in its entirety. And you can tell in court today, no attorney has read Blackstone's books. They've kind of just wiped it to the side and put it under the table, hoping nobody will see. Well, in the process of reading Locke and reading Blackstone, Locke mentions Richard Hooker, which was a member of the English clergy way back when. And there's some amazing stuff that Hooker puts together. He was a member of the clergy, but he was a champion for the individual rights of man under God. And he's the first reference I've come across to conscience, which we're going to get into in a big way in the First Amendment. Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Okay. We'll start off by saying an establishment of religion. The end of the what I want to read next to last is James Madison wrote the First Amendment. And it's a very simple one or two sentences, but when you read what he wrote about his First Amendment, it opens up a huge can of worms. I would like somebody who's got a King James to open their Bible to Hosea 4:6.
Can you see?
Let's be just a little bit interactive here. Whoever finds it first, go ahead and start reading.
It says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee. That thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God. I will also forget thy children.
Now read that first line again.
Louder, please.
My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge.
There you go.
Because thou hast rejected knowledge.
There you go. How many here have heard of William Blackstone?
Is that related to the Black's Law Dictionary?
Not at all. Not at all. Blackstone and Black are two different individuals. William Blackstone, for having been on the King's Own Court, writes he's extremely thorough when he relates to the law. In his introduction, I think I read his before I read John Locke's. Locke's was written previous, but since I read Blackstone first, I'm going to read it to you. In his introduction, for the first time in my life, I saw where somebody, a real an expert in the law, mentioned or brought the truth to light, the fundamental truth. I'm going to read it. Man, considered as a creature, must necessarily be subject to the laws of his creator, for he is entirely a dependent being. A being independent of any other has no rule to pursue, but such as he prescribes to himself. But a state of dependence will inevitably oblige the inferior to take the will of him on whom he depends as the rule of his conduct. Not indeed in every particular, but in all those points wherein his dependence consists. This principle, therefore, has more or less extent and effect in proportion as the superiority of the one and the dependence of the other is greater or less, absolute or limited. Consequently, as man depends absolutely upon his Maker for everything, it is necessary that he should in all points conform to his Maker's will. The will of his Maker is called the law of nature. And you're going to find I'm going to focus a lot on the law of nature, because to understand your rights under the First Amendment, you have to have a concept of what is the law of nature. It's a jurisdiction. It's not a particular place. It's not the wilderness per se. It's a jurisdiction. You have a choice to enter society with all of its constraints placed upon you immediately, or you have the choice to remain in the state of nature, or, as we're going to find out, return to the state of nature. In the state of nature, you have no benefits offered by the state. You are living literally under God by the strength and the independence of your own hands and capabilities. When I first came across that, I was fascinated, because that's what I was attempting to do and did do, commencing about 1997. Now I'm going to read Locke's on state of nature, because he goes into it a little deeper. To understand political power right and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom, to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and their persons as they think fit, within the bounds of law of nature, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. A state also of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantage of nature, and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection, unless the Lord and Master of them all should, by any manifest declaration of his will, set one above another, and to confer on him by an evident and clear appointment an undoubted right to dominion and sovereignty. And here's where we get into Richard Hooker. This equality of men by nature, the judicious Hooker looks upon as so evident in itself and beyond all question, that he makes it the foundation of that obligation to mutual love amongst men, on which he builds the duties they owe one another, and from whence he derives the great maxims of justice and charity. His words are, "The like natural inducement hath brought men to know that it is no less their duty to love others than themselves, for seeing those things which are equal must needs all have one measure. If I cannot but wish to receive good, even as much at every man's hands, as any man can wish unto his own soul, how should I look to have any part of my desire satisfied, unless myself be careful to satisfy the like desire, which is undoubtedly in other men, being of one and the same nature? To have anything offered them repugnant to this desire must needs in all respects grieve them as much as me. So that if I do harm, I must look to suffer, there being no reason that others should show greater measure of love to me than they have by me showed unto them. My desire therefore to be loved of my equals in nature as much as possible may be, imposeth upon me a natural duty of bearing to them ward fully the like affection, from which relation of equality between ourselves and them that are as ourselves, what several rules and canons natural reason hath drawn, for direction of life no man is ignorant." Now, as you'll notice, these 3 or 4 gentlemen I'm quoting didn't have fluoride in their water, and they weren't addicted to aspartame or anything else, and they could put a sentence out there, and it takes us a little bit to follow. "Though this be a state of liberty, yet it is not a state of license." This is back to Locke. We're done quoting Hooker. "Though this be a state of liberty, it is not a state of license. Though man in that state have an uncontrollable liberty to dispose of his person or possessions, yet he has not liberty to destroy himself or so much as any creature in his possession, but where some nobler use than its bare preservation calls for it. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind, who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possession. For men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise Maker, all the servants of one sovereign Master, sent into the world by his order and about his business, they are his property, whose workmanship they are, made to last during his, not one another's pleasure. And being furnished with like faculties, sharing all in one community of nature, there cannot be supposed any such subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy one another, as if we were made for one another's uses, as the inferior ranks of creatures are made for ours. Every one, as he is bound to preserve himself and not to quit his station willfully, so by the like reason, when his own preservation comes not in competition, ought he, as much as he can, to preserve the rest of mankind. That's pretty charitable for a legitimate jurisdiction on earth that a man can live in, where the state isn't ordering him around, nor is the state defending him. He is literally subject to God, and therein you have a choice. You can engage the state of nature as a child of God, or you can engage the state of nature as an atheist. Either way, as long as you abide by the rules. Because in the state of nature, every man is judge, jury, and executioner, if need be. If there is a tyrant, or a murderer, or a thief, and everyone's just in a mutual state of nature, and we're neighbors, we know each other, we probably cooperate in a great many things. But if there's a problem, those men have absolute authority to deal with it. And I have found in my research, the first police department was in Boston. And it was put together literally to protect the politicians from the people. I don't think we've gone far from that. I think that's where we're at today. They're protecting the politicians, and they're protecting the criminals. And here we are. Okay, now we're going to take that state of nature, and we're going to start to bring it in line with some of the First Amendment principles. A man by the name of Theophilus Parsons. This Essex Result is the name of the document. 29 April 1778. A group of men got together in Massachusetts and put together a framework of a constitution for the state of Massachusetts. Another group of men got together, Theophilus Parsons being their leader, and said, no, that's not going to work, and here's why. Parsons went on to become Massachusetts' first Chief Justice of their Supreme Court. He's qualified to say what he said here. Like I said, he's giving the reasons why this particular draft of the Constitution won't work. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's not that long, but we're going to run out of time because I've got a lot more to get through. One of his grievances against this constitutional draft was a Bill of Rights clearly ascertaining and defining the rights of conscience and that security of person and property, which every member of the state hath a right to expect from the supreme power thereof, ought to be settled and established previous to the ratification of any constitution for the state. He was adamant that the rights of conscience needed to be established in a Bill of Rights before he would accept a constitutional draft. Now there's so many things to tie in. And this Essex Result is something that everybody should look at and read, because he just summarizes Republican government, good Republican government. And that was point number 2. I'm going to skip down to point 10. Here he goes again. That the rights of conscience and the security of person and property each member of the state is entitled to are not ascertained and defined in this Constitution with a precision sufficient to limit the legislative power, and therefore that the 13th article of this Constitution is exceptionable. That the 34th article is exceptionable, because the rights of conscience are not therein clearly defined and ascertained, and further, because the free exercise and enjoyment of religious worship is there said to be allowed to all the Protestants in the state, when in fact that free exercise and enjoyment is the natural and uncontrollable right of every member of the state. So there was someone's first effort to say, we'll allow such and such, so, join up. Well, no, you don't have the power to allow or deny, is what Parsons told me. When I get to it, he gets into the state of nature, which is, here we go. The reason and understanding of mankind, as well as the experience of all ages, confirm the truth of this proposition, that the benefits resulting to individuals from a free government conduce much more to their happiness than the retaining of all their natural rights, catch that, than the retaining of all their natural rights in a state of nature. And you gotta keep in mind, Theophilus Parsons was at one time previous to this an English subject. You'll see in Blackstone and Locke's works, try as they might, they couldn't quite get themselves away from the notion that society is better than a state of nature. And Locke and Blackstone, they still sympathize with the position of a king. We're getting away from that a little bit with Parsons here, but what I'm getting at is they all come to the same conclusion, which puzzles me, that society, the benefits of society, are better than the state of nature. We got it from Locke and we got it from Blackstone that God put us all in a state of nature when he inserted us into this realm. And then men choose to form up a society. And then that society says, come on over here, take our benefits and our package and our perks and our conveniences. And when I read that first time, I said to myself, what's God say when I say, oh, this is my birthright? Wow. Oh, this is what man has to offer. I think I'll go with what man has to offer. I don't understand that. And we can see where it has led. As we try to form up a society where somebody else is making rules to rule God's people on earth. Okay, keep going here. Parsons does a very good job. Even that's the main point I disagree with him on. I mean, obviously, yeah, you can have a comfortable life. But what about Sam Adams that talked about the animated contest of freedom? We'll get into that a little bit further too. These benefits of society are greater or less as the form of government and the mode of exercising the supreme power of the state are more or less comfortable to those principles of equal, impartial liberty, which is the property of all men from their birth as the gift of their Creator. Compared with the manners and genius of the people, their occupations, customs, modes of thinking, situation, extent of country, and numbers. If the Constitution and form of government are wholly repugnant to these principles, wretched are the subjects of that state. They have surrendered a portion of their natural rights, the enjoyment of which was in some degree a blessing. He admits that here. The enjoyment of their natural rights in a state of nature was in some degree a blessing. Well, I would say so if the tyranny of today is the alternative. The consequences, as they find stripped of the remainder, that for having joined society, I'll read that again. If the Constitution and form of government are wholly repugnant to these principles, wretched are the subjects of that state. They have surrendered a portion of their natural rights, the enjoyment of which was in some degree a blessing, and the consequences is they find themselves stripped of the remainder.